everyone, and welcome to the April 2022 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. April is National Poetry Month, so in celebration of this event, we've got a wonderful conversation with Lisa Tomey talking to poets Zan Johns and Carlos Miller. So I'm going to turn this over to Lisa. Lisa?
Thank you. And just a little.
Oops.
I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. A special welcome to Zan Johns and Carlos Miller for being our special guest tonight. Zan Johns is a 3-time best-selling author, and after a 2020 debut book, Poetic Forecast, topped Amazon's bestseller list at #1 in 6 categories. She embraced her passion of creative expression and has not slowed down or looked back. Her highly anticipated second book of poetry, After the Rainbow, was released on 2/22/22. Johns is a contributing author in the Women's Speakers Association #1 international bestsellers, Voices of the 21st Century, Resilient Women Who Rise and Make a Difference, and Voices of the 21st Century, Conscious Caring Women Who Make a Difference. Zan's poems are featured as the dedication page in both collaborative bestsellers. She's been a moderator for A Passion of Poetry, is an editor for Fine Lines Literary Journal, is in several anthologies, and just cannot stop with poetry. And I'm certainly glad. And thank you so much, Zan, for coming tonight. Carlos Terrell Miller is a Hebrew author, book shepherd, teacher, speaker, and spoken word poet, whose literary efforts and moving messages continue to emphasize a rededication and recommitment to healing as men, realizing this will enable us to further develop as positive, emotionally present husbands and fathers in homes all over the country. Miller believes that God is the only way for a man to heal and humbly receive the wisdom needed to live out the fullness of his potential and cultivate healthy relationships, rooted and reinforced in love, acceptance, and wise teaching. A native of Jackson, Mississippi, his career choices, including his military service, in both in Texas, to completing their service. Faith, seeking, knitted in truth and transparency. Carlos is what we call the book shepherd of Sugar Sugar Publishing, LLC. Sugar Sugar is named after his mother. And he definitely is like the father of many many authors, and works, I don't know how, when the man sleeps, works endlessly with his promotion and helping people get their poetry out to the world. Thank you both so much for coming. What I want to do is ask some questions. I did ask our participants for input on questions. And then after we do some questions and answer, then we're going to have each of them read a poem for us. But after all, if we're going to have poets, we need to have poetry. I'm going to start with the first question. I'm going to start with Zan for this, and then we'll turn it over to Carlos. Which poets have had the most influence on you personally?
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for that very kind, generous introduction. I'm happy to be here with your group. Nikki Giovanni is the one person who had the most influence on me as a freshman in college when I saw her at the University of Colorado in the mid-70s. She walked across the stage with so much grace, finesse, and attitude as a young poet. And to see a poet who looked like me made a huge difference. I had written in high school, I had studied poetry, but it was mostly about Robert Frost, some Langston Hughes, but mostly people who did not look like me. So hearing and seeing Nikki Giovanni, and later Maya Angelou visited the campus, I was intrigued. I started writing, and I like to say that Nikki Giovanni and Maya Angelou changed my life.
Thank you. And Zan, you had a wonderful expression that you created. I'm going to share the screen and let you read this.
Okay. I was thinking about this group and the question, the influence of Black poets on the world of poetry. And I say that Black poets are as vital to the world of poetry as the late Katherine Johnson was to land us on the moon. Bold and brave, Black poets make a difference. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing that.
Thank you.
I can't imagine the world without Black poets. I was thinking about this. Can you imagine a rainbow without color? Can you imagine reading the same book every day or hearing the same poem or the same music every day? I can't. Black poets make a difference. The influence that they've had has been phenomenal from the 18th century to today, from Phyllis Wheatley to Amanda Gorman, from Langston Hughes to Jericho Brown. I am, and Carlos Miller is, because of them. We are because of the Black poets who came before us.
Thank you so much. Carlos?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa, for inviting me and having me. I'm happy to be here with you all this evening. Ms. Zan, I'm always taken away when I get the opportunity to listen and learn from the things that you bring out. When it comes to probably the poets that have had the most impact and influence on my life, the first and foremost one would be my best friend, Anton Cole. He was a journalism major at Ole Miss. We started writing. He introduced me to poetry in the ninth grade chemistry class. And he was a phenomenal writer, and he was a stellar student in Philadelphia, Mississippi, the little city where Mississippi burning happened. So we dealt with some conflict that's a little more extreme than what some people may even be aware of. We dealt with that every day, but he would take that aggression and he would leave it on paper, or he would take all the frustration, or he would take the injustice that he saw and he would leave it on paper, and he would make it his business to make it as concise as possible so anybody that ingested it would know exactly why he wrote it. So he was the greatest influence that I've encountered my whole life. He died on my birthday last year from COVID. And a close second to him would be Langston Hughes. I often say Langston Hughes, my muse. I look into his words and I see the brilliance of a Black man that did not let the time and the strife and the racial injustice that he felt at that particular time, which was far more extreme than what we deal with now, far more apparent than what we deal with now. But he wouldn't let it get the best of him because he understood his responsibility in it all. And that's what poets have to do, especially Black poets. We understand our responsibility in this race that we're running. So yeah, Anton and Langston Hughes by far are, if there were only a few pages, if I was only allotted a few pages to read for the rest of my life, then I'd throw every book away and only read their writing, because they had that type of effect on me. So yeah, thank you. Oh, Ms. Lisa, thank you so much for having me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you were alive during the Harlem Renaissance, where would you hope to live as a poet? Zan?
Well, I think I'd want to be in New York because seeing what happened in the early, or the early 1920s, 1930s, the voices were so, the poets were brave, first of all, to be able to share what they really felt. It was the beginning of truth telling through poetry. And the synergy, when I look back at documentaries that talk about the poets of that time, that was the foundation being laid. Even though I think about Langston Hughes, no, Paul Laurence Dunbar and Maya Angelou, who came later, they both wrote about the caged bird. I know why the caged bird sings. You've heard the poems. And a songbird, Black poets and authors didn't have a voice. They had a voice, but they weren't heard so much. That was the time, the beginning of when people insisted on being heard. You can't silence a songbird. And so these poets came together. There was community, which is what we have here, which is what I'm enjoying. I'm enjoying being a part of the poetry community. So I think about the Harlem Renaissance and the transition that happened from the late 1700s to the 1800s and then the 1920s and 30s. It was significant. It then bled into the civil rights movement. So to be part of the foundation of the bravery that occurred in New York City, even though I'm a small town, girl from Louisiana, I can't imagine living in New York, but I would have loved to have been a part of that tight-knit poetry community.
Carlos?
You want me to? Okay.
Yes.
That's a difficult question to approach. I think about a few years ago when Kanye West made a statement, slavery was a choice. And I understood the mindset behind him saying it, but it's almost impossible for us to understand what that experience in that time frame must have been. It's the same irrationality that we hear when people compare LeBron James to Michael Jordan. You're talking about two different eras. But as far as like the demographics of it, I would still prefer to be in the South. Mississippi birthed the ache in me that comes out in my writing. It comes out in my voice. And people always, people always make reference to that voice, something about that voice. This voice came from agony. This voice came from the warnings that my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, they had to give me about not going across the tracks or not being up Deemer Road, after sundown. And after you see a few things and after you experience a few things in life, then there's something attached to your soul. We never really get rid of pain in our life. We adopt it and we use it. And poets, more than anybody else, understand how to transpose pain so that it doesn't cripple us any longer. But we use that pain to bring out the most in every expression. So anybody that hears your poetry or reads your words, they understand that it's pain in every syllable. So I don't feel like any other place but Mississippi or Alabama or Memphis. I don't feel like there's any other place in the world that could have made me the poet that I am now or then. So yeah, I probably still opt to be in the South. You might not hear about me. You might not hear much about me, but I still opt to be in the South. Mhm.
May I talk about the 60s? I think, you know, I'm glad to have been born and raised at the time I was born and raised.
Yes.
But in the early 60s, if we were to have been adults at that time and poets at that time, I think about the messages that came across and what transpired because of their brave words. You know, today we're able to drink from the same water fountain, or swim in the same swimming pools, attend the same schools. We're not out of the woods, but so much progress was made because of the poets who pushed and who owned their voice and were proud to share their identity, whereas they couldn't, you know, they could, their identity was a part of it, but a lot of the early poets wrote to meet the standard that was not connected to our racial identity per se. And so during the 60s and 50s and 70s, artists still make a difference, but they made a huge difference with all of the working with the political leaders that were in charge, because poetry is easier to listen to than political language. You know, it's easier to hear the message, even though it's ugly a lot of times, if it's being presented artistically. So I believe that the most profound influence that Black poets have is when we talk about political issues, social issues. We can write about the birds and the bees and trees and nature, just like every other poet. But I believe our strongest influence comes when we talk about the things that are the injustices that are occurring. My humble opinion.
Thank you for that. It's so true. It's so true. It's what's pressing. It's what pushes our passion, I think. Our world needs artists of all origins. How do you think our country would have fared without Black poets? Heaven forbid. Either one of you can answer.
Well, the things I just added, the changes that occurred over time, and we're still speaking. We still need change. Lisa, you know, you are about to publish an anthology, it's called Social Justice Inc., correct? And the voices that are in there are global, and they're talking about things that need to change, things that aren't so good, don't feel good. And so I believe that the United States without Black poets, I don't even want to think of what that would look like. I don't want that image. I won't talk about that.
I don't want to talk about it either. I don't want to think about it.
I would have to agree with Ms. Zan. You know, poets demand, if when done effectively, when we really embrace the honor that accompanies being a poet. Every time you grab a microphone, I have an opportunity to recite a poem, to write a poem, to read a poem. You have the opportunity to share an experience that none of the listeners may be privy to. And people respect the message. You never hear, I haven't heard of anybody arguing against the poet, say, no, you're wrong, don't say anything like that. No, poets need liberty. And poets should communicate liberty, not reckless liberty, because if anybody gets out of any incarcerated state and they go contrary to what freedom defines, then they're gonna wind up back in that same place. But you need the freedom to be fair, to be just, and to exercise equality. And poets should be allowed to do that. What one man can say, the other man should be allowed to say. One venue this man can perform in, the other man should be allowed to perform in. So if we are denied those rights, then we're not a free people. None of us. If all of us are not free, none of us are free. And that's what our poetry should do. It should liberate. It helps everything outside of this black skin understand the reason behind the mannerisms, behind some of the attitudes. Now, I'm not justifying having attitudes. I'm not justifying, going off the handle, but there's a frustration embedded in our souls. And at any given time, you might catch a whiff of it, depending on what day it is. But we're talking about decades and decades of struggle, denial, and oppression. We're talking about, and I had a young man, I served in the military with him about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And he got a different perspective. I didn't see it when we were in the military, And he's one of my Caucasian brothers, but sometimes when he hear me say certain things or type out certain things about something that we feeling as Black people, he had audacity to say, just get over it. Is that fair? To say, just get over it. We're dealing with psychological issues. We're dealing with things that nobody has ever addressed. And we limping through life as a people. And it's hard. And poets help everybody understand that. And I think we would be in a much more detrimental state, if you will, if we didn't have the balance that Black poetry brings to society. So, yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Zan. I would like to open it up to a discussion if anyone else has anything they'd like to comment or offer before I ask these wonderful poets to read their poetry. Does anyone have any particular questions?
I can put in one, just put in the chat, because I can't imagine not having read Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes. I mean, they were so powerful to me, and I related to a lot of it. And I read everything by Maya Angelou. I just couldn't get enough of it. And even more than Emily Dickinson. I know some will think I'm blasphemous, but a lot of her poetry I just don't relate to, but I do with Maya Angelou. And I just can't imagine my life without having read her work or seen her work. And I also enjoy reading poets from other nationalities and cultures, like even with Jewish poetry, because you get to step into that world and see what that life is and feel that life and visualize that life. Poetry does incredible things, and I have to have it in my life.
Carlos, I do a lot of writing for Military Officer magazine, so I'm intrigued by your military service. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how your service has influenced your poetic voice?
I wasn't prepared for that one, but yeah, I served in the United States Army from 95 to 99. The military, if nothing else, it forced me to write more. I had a cousin that I had grown up with like a brother. Actually, I wrote a poem called Like Brothers, and he was going through some things. He's in and out of prison, and all while he was in prison, nobody was thinking to write to him, and it made me write poetry more. I wrote poems about how his mom had taken it up on herself. His mom was my first cousin, so she had taken it up on herself to just lump me in with her kids and take me to skating rink, because my mom wasn't around. So she would take me to the skating rink and take me to do things that, you know, most kids was doing. I didn't know how to do it, you know, but she still would take. So he and I grew up more so like brothers. So when he was locked up, I did a lot of writing. Wrote a lot of poems to my wife. I met her when we were in AIT in Fort Gordon, Georgia. I met her in '96, and she was attached to a CAV unit, 1st Cavalry Division. I was attached to a COSCOM unit, so we were maintenance support battalion, so we were rear support. We didn't get deployed as much, and they were sending her to California, sending her to Bosnia. She was all over. She was the soldier, you know. I would write her poems, you know, to keep her encouraged and like make her laugh. I said all the mushy stuff. I guess that's when I got all that mushy stuff out of me, you know. So, and she was actually the one that she would always be like, "Babe, write your book, write your book." It's a book that I've been writing, I guess, for, well, since 1996, 97, when she started like introducing me. I said, man, I can't write no book. I can't write no book, but she would always encourage me just to keep writing. So if nothing else, I think, you know, my wife is the greatest reward I got out of the military. As you know, it's an honor to have served, and I met some amazing people, got battle buddies all over the world. But the one that I've been with for the last 20 some years, you know, yeah, she's probably the motivation behind every line that I write, because I wouldn't even believe that it was worth writing if she hadn't been there the whole time encouraging me to keep writing. So
I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you, Carlos. That's
yes,
a great story.
yeah, thank you.
I would like
Lisa,
yes.
I'm sorry.
Carlos?
Are you okay on Zoom?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, you blanked out there a little bit. You were
Oh,
saying
okay.
something and we didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Carlos, would you like to go ahead and read your poem?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
I'm gonna share a little bit about our marriage. A lot of people may not have the guts to do, but this is one of those things you gotta let a poet be free. And my wife hates this poem, but so it reads, we just had the biggest fight. Broke furniture and all. She sipped Moscato, then flung the bottle at me and it crashed against the wall. She screamed, yelled, was outraged. And I was every name you could call. Now I'm here now wondering in my mind if there's any making up at all. We just had the biggest fight and seems like it was worse this time. Thoughts of saying hateful things to her I never imagined saying ran through my mind. I slammed that door, I cut that phone off. She can't reach me if she tried. But having this phone off is killing me because I can't get her off my mind. I love her. We just had the biggest fight, and I don't know if there's much left. I'm asking, why bother doing bad together when I could do bad all by myself? I'm asking if it's worth this pain I feel worse than I've ever felt. The more I give myself to her, the more I lose myself. We just had the biggest fight. I'm pretty sure we breaking up. Ain't no staying together after. There's no way in hell we making up. No way to overlook what's happening. Our whole world is shaken up in this violence. This volatile place we're in, it's not a good place for us. Now I'm here now, distracted and going through motions. I can hardly concentrate. I want to call her and talk about it, but I'm not sure what I could say. Not sure if it's a way that she and I could communicate. I don't know if it's even worth it. Hell, what difference would it make? How much can one heart take? How many times do I bend over backwards loving her before I break? See, I was crazy about her. Now I'm just crazy. Now, what sense does that make? So on my social media, do I check single, married, or complicated? See, every time we're together, I walk away feeling down. And you can call her and ask her. I'm pretty sure she feels the same, but I don't know. We're not speaking now. I can't imagine my life without her. It hurts me just writing it, but I'm confused and I don't know what to do. But I'm damn sure sick of fighting. And we just had the biggest fight. And that's that poem. I wrote that poem that's in Phantasmagoria Poetic Translations. And Phantasmagoria, only by the grace of God, I try to share as transparently as possible the things that a Black man, may be experiencing on any given day. And a lot of what we experience as Black men, it creates a different suffering inside of our homes. And much of that suffering showed up in my relationship. The frustrations that she felt, being a Black woman, having to prove herself every day, having to climb a different ladder from every male, every Black male, every white woman. She got to climb a different ladder, it's a different ladder set up for her, and she got to go twice as hard as everybody else in the room. And me, Black man, I ain't got no ladder. So I crawl and scrape every day, just trying to provide and trying to make a way. And I go home with all that frustration. And she come home with the same frustrations. And so many days we will wind up fighting. So yeah, that's where that poem came from.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning your book, which I failed to do at the beginning. I did read that book. That was how I got to know you. And then your other book, The Husband, the Wife, and Their God.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent, both excellent books of poetry and story. Thank you. Zan, would you like to read your poem?
Yes, but before I do, I have to say that what you just witnessed is one of the biggest influences of Black poets. The voice that you just heard, the identity, and Carlos had the liberty to express deep, deep personal feelings, and he did it in such a way that makes it difficult for me to follow him as usual. So thank you for sharing that poem. It was amazing. And I have my book on order as well.
Thank you, Ms. Zan.
The poem that I'll share is called What Matters. And I wrote this poem in, 1999, the year 2000, when we were dealing with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We were dealing with English as a second language legislation. We were dealing with gay rights, etc. I added to this poem in the year 2020 when new issues surfaced. And the fact that I had to add verses to this poem is kind of disturbing because it tells me we're headed in the wrong direction. Even though I'm always hopeful, I believe in the end we will know what matters. So I present to you what matters. If your eyes met my eyes in the midst of a crisis, Would their shape and color concern you? If you felt my hands as they massaged your aching body, would you care about the pigmentation of my skin? If I gave blood to replenish your low supply, would you need to know that I looked like you? If you were drowning and I dove in to assist you, would you reach toward me if you knew I was gay? If you were hearing for the first time in your life, would you need for my voice to speak English only? If your loved one lay sick and dying, would it matter to which God I prayed? If I donated money to support your favorite cause, would you refuse it if you knew how I voted? If the size of my heart increased each time I helped somebody, would you be more interested in the size of my body? If you asked me to walk a mile in support of humanity, would you get impatient if I used my wheelchair? If I said no, and you assaulted me anyway, are you less guilty because I waited to report? If my family seeks asylum in the USA, are we not welcome because our border is to your south? If the police force keeps killing unarmed citizens, would you demand justice if they are African American? With civil unrest during this global pandemic, trust me, we will soon realize what matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Whew. Wow. Two
Very
wonderful poets, such prolific poets. Wow. Thank you both so much for coming out tonight. Does anybody else have anything to offer before we close?
One more question, if that's all right. Especially after hearing both of you speak in your poetry, I find myself hesitant to write and even intimidated, like Maya said, because it is so raw and vulnerable to write poetry, but then to still feel like you're confined by rules of what's acceptable or what's correct. What advice would you give to getting over that, to writing it with the vulnerability you two have shown?
Let's see. Am I audible? Maya,
Yes.
okay, thanks. Maya talked about being brave and just going out there and doing it. Don't wait until you're confident. I have to tell you, I'll admit that I don't necessarily like speaking in public. I don't necessarily like being vulnerable, but I love poetry. And once I published my book, I learned that I couldn't go away and hide in the corner and just write. I learned that I had to get out because the readers want to know who you are. And so I had to get past that reservation, that hesitation to put myself out there. I just did it. You know, I love Hawaii. I don't like flying over water, but do you think that's going to keep me from going to Hawaii? No, it didn't. So I say just do it. Just go for it.
Thank you. And to echo or piggyback on what Ms. Zan said, I think you're making one of the best decisions you could make right now, because you're on a screen filled with writers that feel the exact same thing that you feel. When Don asked how we met Miss Lisa, and I thought about how the Lord connected me with Cheryl and Lyris, and then Miss Lisa, and then Melanie, you know, and it was like this big Lego block thing that just kept happening. As long as you had Lego blocks that fit, because we're all the same, much like Lego blocks. Everybody fits somewhere. You just gotta figure out where you fit and then stop for a minute and say, hey, does it make sense for me to be right here? Because you could put a Lego block in the wrong place and it mess up the whole thing. But you have to be with people that not only push you, but they pull you when necessary. Because I was just sharing this morning, I'm kind of shy on cameras, you know. I get this thing when it's time to be on camera or time to get on stage or time to get on microphones or what have you. And it's the real life cold feet. Like they say, they talk about people that have cold feet, but it's a real nervous condition, a nervous tick. And it's far from cold. It's like fire ants eating your feet up. So sometimes, like now, I done kick my shoes off and you see me moving, it's because I'm rubbing my feet on the carpet. Because, you know, you might always be nervous, but I wouldn't have sought out the opportunity to be here with you all, and I would have been depriving myself because I met, you know, 15, 20 wonderful people tonight, and y'all met me. But all that because of Miss Lisa and Miss Zan and Cheryl, you know, once you connect with the right people, then they will not let you hide in fear. Like Miss Zan said, you know, these books, I wrote these books, you know, I wrote these books a couple of years ago. I don't know nothing about jumping on those screen. Hey, I wrote a book, or, you know, the marketing and stuff that comes with it. So I have to have people that care enough where they won't leave me. And you got that. So you made one of the best decisions you could make in connecting with all these amazing smiling faces that believe in you. And I believe in you. So you might always be scared, but fear is not a reality. Just do it anyway.
I want to thank both of you for joining us this evening. This was an absolutely magnificent session. Both of you are just absolutely amazingly talented. Really, really enjoyed the poems that you shared with us this evening. Thank you very, very much for being with us. This was just terrific.
Thank you so much, Don. Before I go, I do want to mention a new anthology, which is the book that Lisa, you might have a graphic for it, but it's the one that was just released, 200 African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song. And it was published covering poets. I think it's 1,000 different poems in this anthology. I just ordered it. I highly recommend it.
Apologize, Zan, you did send that to me and I forgot to pop it. Didn't have it ready.
It's okay. African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song. It's available on Amazon.
Speaking of which, Carlos and Zan's books are all available on Amazon as well.